In 1983, the CIA commissioned a classified research report on a technique that claimed to do something that should be impossible: not spy on foreign governments, not break codes, not intercept communications, train the human mind to leave the body, access information beyond the physical senses, and potentially, according to the document itself, interact with a non-physical layer of reality that underlies everything that exists. The report was called The Analysis and Assessment of the Gateway Experience. It sat classified for decades. Then in 2003, it was declassified and quietly uploaded to the government's own document archive, and for 17 years, almost nobody noticed. Then in 2020, a single Reddit post went viral. Someone had found it, read it, and posted about it with 2 words: "What is this?" Because this wasn't a fringe conspiracy document. It wasn't written by someone on the edge of credible science. It was a 29-page analysis written by a U.S. Army lieutenant colonel, grounded in quantum physics, neuroscience, and consciousness research, attempting to explain, using hard science, how meditation, at its deepest levels, might actually give a human being access to something that sits outside normal space and time. Today, we're going to go through it, all of it, what it actually says, what the science behind it is, what the gateway process is and how it works, and at the end, what it means for how reality might actually be structured. Because this document doesn't just describe a meditation technique, it describes a model of reality. And that model is stranger and more coherent than almost anything you've encountered before. Let's start at the beginning. What is the gateway experience? The gateway experience was developed in the 1970s by a man named Robert Monroe. Monroe was a successful businessman and radio producer who, in the late 1950s, spontaneously began having out-of-body experiences, not drug-induced, not the result of any spiritual practice. They started happening to him involuntarily and they terrified him. He spent years trying to understand what was happening. Eventually, he founded the Monroe Institute in Virginia, which developed an audio technology called hemi-sync, short for hemispheric synchronization. Here's how it works. You play a slightly different tone in each ear simultaneously. Because your brain processes the 2 tones together, it perceives a third tone, one that doesn't actually exist in the audio. This perceived tone pulses at a specific frequency, and your brain, following what's called the frequency following response, begins to synchronize its own electrical activity to match that pulse. This is not metaphysics. This is basic auditory neuroscience. By choosing specific frequencies, you can guide the brain from its normal waking state, beta waves, around 14 to 30 cycles per second, down through alpha waves, which is the relaxed, focused state, down through theta waves, which is the hypnagogic state between waking and sleep, where many people experience vivid imagery and unusual cognition, and in deep practice toward delta waves, which is normally only present in dreamless sleep. But here's the key thing the gateway process is trying to achieve. It isn't just trying to relax the brain, it's trying to synchronize both hemispheres simultaneously. Left brain and right brain operating in coherent unity at the same frequency at the same time. The CIA document describes this as achieving a state of whole brain coherence and argues that this state is the gateway to something much larger. What does the CIA document actually claim? This is where it gets genuinely strange. The report's author, Lieutenant Colonel Wayne McDonnell, does not start with meditation or spirituality. He starts with quantum physics. Specifically, he starts with the work of physicist Max Planck, the same physicist who established that consciousness is fundamental, not derivative of matter, and he builds from there. The report argues the following. At the quantum level, all matter is not solid. It is energy, vibrating at specific frequencies, and that energy exists within and is part of a larger energy field, called the absolute in the document, that contains all information about all events across all time, not metaphorically, literally. The document cites physicist Itzhak Bentov's model of consciousness and describes the universe as a hologram, a system where every part contains information about the whole. This is not fringe physics. Holographic universe theory has been seriously proposed by physicists including David Bohm, one of the most respected quantum physicists of the 20th century. The idea is that what we experience as three-dimensional physical reality is a kind of projection, an unfolding of a deeper order that contains all information in an encoded, compressed form. The document then argues that human consciousness, as an energy system, operates within this larger field, and that in normal waking life, the brain's constant internal noise, the endless chatter of thoughts, the sensory input, the emotional processing, all of this creates a kind of interference pattern that prevents consciousness from accessing the deeper signal beneath it. The gateway process, according to the document, is a method for reducing that interference to the point where consciousness can expand beyond the brain's normal operating boundaries and begin to interact with the larger field directly. In plain language, meditation, taken deep enough, may be a technology for tuning your consciousness to a frequency that allows you to access information that exists outside your normal senses and outside normal time. The model of consciousness the document describes. The CIA report describes human consciousness using a very specific model. And it's worth understanding this model carefully because it reframes almost everything. Consciousness, according to the document, is not produced by the brain. The brain is more like a receiver and a transducer, a device that converts energy from one form to another. Consciousness exists as an energy pattern within the larger field. The brain doesn't generate it, it tunes to it, like a radio tuning to a frequency that already exists. This distinction matters enormously because if consciousness is generated by the brain, it is entirely local, entirely physical, and it ends when the brain dies. But if consciousness is an energy pattern in a larger field, the brain is just one way of accessing and expressing it, and energy, as physics has established, cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change form. The document doesn't explicitly argue for the existence of the soul, but the physics it describes leads directly there, and the author doesn't step back from that implication. He leans into it. The report also describes what it calls the holographic model of memory. The idea that memories are not stored in specific neurons, but distributed across the brain as interference patterns. Holographic storage is extraordinarily dense and extraordinarily resilient. Damage part of a hologram and you don't lose part of the image. You get a slightly degraded version of the whole image. This aligns with a great deal of what we actually observe about memory, including why people with significant brain damage can sometimes retain remarkably intact memories, the out-of-body experience and what the document says about it. This is the section most people find hardest to process, because the document doesn't treat out-of-body experiences as hallucinations or psychological phenomena. It treats them as literal. The report describes consciousness leaving the physical body as a function of energy expansion. When whole brain coherence is achieved and maintained, the document argues, the energy pattern of consciousness is no longer constrained to the physical body's bandwidth. It can expand, and when it expands far enough, it can operate independently of the physical system. The document references verified cases where subjects in out-of-body states accurately described physical locations they had no way of accessing through normal senses. This is the foundation of what the CIA called remote viewing, a separate program related to but distinct from Gateway, in which trained individuals attempted to perceive distant locations using only consciousness. Remote viewing was not a classified rumor. It was a funded U.S. government program called Project Stargate that ran from 1972 to 1995. Its results were reviewed by independent scientists, including a team from the American Institutes for Research. The conclusion was that statistically significant results had been produced that could not be explained by chance, not proof, but significantly better than chance. And the government funded it for 23 years. What the document says about time. This is the part that stops most people completely. The CIA report argues that at the level of the absolute, the fundamental energy field beneath physical reality, Time does not exist as we experience it. In normal consciousness, we experience time as linear, past behind us, future ahead. Now is all we have access to. But the document argues this is a function of the brain's processing architecture, not a feature of reality itself. The larger field, the hologram, contains all information about all events simultaneously. Past and future are not sequential in the field, they coexist. This is not a new idea in physics. Einstein himself said that the distinction between past, present, and future is a stubbornly persistent illusion. Quantum physics has repeatedly demonstrated phenomena where the measurement of a particle in the present appears to influence its behavior in the past, a phenomenon called retrocausality that remains one of the most disturbing and unresolved findings in modern physics. The document suggests that in deep meditative states, specifically in the states achieved through the gateway process, consciousness may be accessing the field directly. And if the field contains all temporal information simultaneously, then a sufficiently expanded consciousness might be able to perceive events that haven't happened yet in linear time, not through any mystical process, through a physics-based mechanism, by temporarily operating outside the brain's time-bound processing constraints. This is what the document calls time-space dimension access, and it's one of the most extraordinary claims in a document full of extraordinary claims. What does this mean for you? Here's where we land. Because this document isn't just a historical curiosity, it's a coherent model of reality with practical implications. If the model is correct, even partially correct, then several things follow. First, consciousness is not a byproduct of matter. It is a fundamental feature of reality. This reframes everything about what you are. You are not a body that somehow generates awareness. You are awareness, temporarily expressed through a body. Second, the boundary between self and world is not where we think it is. If consciousness exists as an energy pattern within a field that contains all information, then your mind is not sealed inside your skull. It is participating in something vastly larger right now, whether you are aware of it or not. Third, the practices that human beings have used for thousands of years, meditation, breath work, contemplative prayer, certain forms of focused attention, may not be spiritual comfort or psychological tools. They may be actual technologies, imprecise, ancient, culturally encoded technologies for tuning consciousness to a wider bandwidth. And fourth, the deepest experiences that human beings report, profound connection, the sense of unity, the feeling in deep meditation that the boundary between self and everything else dissolves, may not be hallucinations or emotional experiences. They may be accurate perceptions, glimpses of the structure of reality as it actually is, beneath the brain's filtering and editing and narrative construction. The CIA wasn't trying to prove God. They were trying to figure out if consciousness could be weaponized. That's a very different goal. But in the process of investigating that question, they produced a document that describes reality in a way that is simultaneously more scientifically grounded and more philosophically extraordinary than almost anything in mainstream discourse. The document ends with the author acknowledging that what he has described cannot be fully verified with current scientific instruments, but he doesn't dismiss it. He takes it seriously as a model. He says the implications are significant enough that they deserve serious ongoing investigation. 40 years later, they still do. The document is publicly available. The full title is Analysis and Assessment of the Gateway Experience by Lieutenant Colonel Wayne McDonnell, 1983. I will include a link in the description to the CIAS website where the document resides. I encourage you to click the link, enter the title Gateway Experience in the search bar, and read it yourself. Because whatever you conclude about its claims, and you are entitled to conclude whatever the evidence leads you to, it is one of the most unusual, compelling, and serious documents ever produced by a government intelligence agency. Drop a comment below with what you think, because this one I genuinely want to know your take on. If you found this video entertaining or helpful, please consider liking and subscribing so we can continue learning and growing together.